Hello there, people, and welcome to another episode of Flight Review. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. Crazy enough, today I am here to talk to you about the final comic book movie theatrically released in the year 2025. Really? It's only July 27th at this point, right? Like the day we recording this, and we're already done. We're already done with theatrically released comic book films. I mean, yeah, we've got shows and whatnot, but this is it. Fantastic Four First Steps. The fourth and final theatrically released comic book film for 2025. Wow, whatever will we do without comic book films to talk about and critique and go to the theater to see on the back part of 2025? No, it's a good thing. It really is. And I've talked about this. We talked about this a little bit on Vodka Stream the other night because I've been made my resurrection there, if you will, my reappearance. I've been on the show the last couple of weekends, and it's been awesome. And, you know, just talking about how both Marvel and DC, quite honestly, could use the break. Because, you know, not only has the box office landscape changed, which we'll talk about that later on at the end of this particular episode, but it's a situation where both franchises could use a break to really curb what is the actual superhero fatigue going on, which is not about the movies themselves and people being tired of the genre, but about how many superhero movies have been put out every year. If you listen to me on this network, any other shows, this show, you know that I've said for a while that Marvel needs to scale back and really do what DC's planning to do, which is 2 movies a year, 2 shows a year. That's the James Gunn DC Studios plan, and I think Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios should enact the same plan. Now, they're not going to, I don't think. I think they're going to still treat, based on what he has said, they're still going to treat 3 as like the number, if you will. I think they only have 2 next year, but either way, this is a good time to deprogram and you know, focus more on the movies that we got this particular year and talk about the future for both the MCU and the DCU after what was a really good July so far at this point. It really, July's over. It was a really awesome July for both franchises with respect to, you know, like success and positive feedback and getting the fans energized or re-energized, if you will, for their franchises. But yeah, this is it. After this particular episode, that's it for superhero movies until 2026. So we'll dive into that head first here shortly. But of course, before getting into all that, I want to remind everybody listening to this show that you can listen to it and all other shows at the Flightcast Network on theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts, whether it is Apple Podcasts, whether it is the Flightcast YouTube channel, where you can get all of the podcast episodes at the Flightcast at youtube.com/theflightcast, pardon me, and also on Spotify and Pandora as well, or wherever you get your podcasts, whatever podcatcher you use. You can look forward to the Flightcast main show on Tuesdays. I will be talking about San Diego Comic-Con because that's crazy how, at least for me, maybe everybody else, it wasn't lost on everybody else, but for me, because of Fantastic Four and because we've been talking about movies a lot lately, like, I got lost in the shuffle for me that San Diego Comic-Con was this past weekend. And there's definitely some non-comic book things and some comic book related things that I definitely want to talk about, especially with respect to my favorite franchise that boldly goes where no one has gone before. You know I got to talk about that. I must talk about some big announcements that happened and some other curious things that were said with respect to my beloved franchise of all time. So stay tuned for that on Tuesday on the main show, the Flightcast. I'm still trying to figure out what to do on Thursdays, like as far as Flight Box or, you know, another episode of Flight Review or something else. I'm still trying to figure out what to release on Thursdays. But this upcoming weekend, not this weekend obviously, but the next weekend, we'll see the return of Flight Chat, the feedback show. Like I said, Flight Review is taking the place of it this particular weekend. But next weekend, all your feedback, any emails that you send in so far, any more emails you want to send in, we're going to be talking Fantastic Four spoilers without question. And we're going to be talking about Superman still and just the landscape and whatnot. Like all of that discussion, all those emails, all those posts, that will be Flight Chat next weekend. And it's probably going to be another like supercharged episode like last week's was. I think Anthony Dorsey is preparing his email. He asked me the other day if I had seen a movie or not that clearly he has watched recently and wants to give a review on, and it'll be spoiler filled because I've seen the movie. Now it's not a new movie. It's a movie that's come out within the last like 5 to 10 years or whatnot. It's a very good movie. But I will wait until he sends his email missive via Digital Raven for that on Flight Chat. But yes, that will be next weekend in that regard. So All of those shows, again, available at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, thank you to everybody, all of the loyal supporters of patreon.com/theflightcast. I've been trying to keep up on flight speed episodes, and again, there's still like a ton of content, the comics to read, especially now, and definitely movies to watch, especially now. And you know what's interesting is anybody watching Vodka Stream, you may or may not have seen some movies in the background of my shot the other day when we were talking Fantastic Four spoilers that would give you a hint as to a massive genre of films that I want to dive into and do some real flight review episodes on for Patreon. Some of you may be very, very interested to know about that. I've already teased it a couple of times on Patreon. So those of you who are subscribers to patreon.com/theflightcast, you already know if you've heard me say it. But otherwise, yeah, stay tuned for that. Plus a ton of other movies that you more than likely have seen that I have not seen, as well as comics and shows and whatnot to read and watch, respectively. So hope everybody's enjoying all the content there, and as always, cannot thank you enough for your support to the Flightcast Patreon. All right, let's get into it. Fantastic Four First Steps, the 37th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and obviously this one comes on the heels of a, I guess, troubled, tortured, I don't know what you want to call it as far as reception is concerned, but the Fantastic Four wing of like that particular franchise in itself hasn't had like the greatest of receptions, if you will, you know, and I'm nicer than many others are. Look, I saw both of the first two Tim Story films, or both of them, I should say. He only made two. Fantastic Four, which came out in 2005, and then Rise of the Silver Surfer, which came out in 2008 or 2009. And I did like the first one better than Rise of the Silver Surfer, you know, and what they tried to do with those films, I think it was still done in that period where, you know, the comic booky stuff was still, you know, there was still pushback, and there was still some resistance by Hollywood to really like lean heavily in to that aesthetic, and we're certainly seeing that, you know, that caution thrown to the wind now. Like, you know, costumes have been embraced, colors and different like suspension of disbelief have been embraced in that regard, and even before we got to the movies this year, certainly more than they were embraced in the Fantastic Four movies back then in that regard. I mean, they tried to ground everything. They did the realistic, practical Thing costume for Michael Chiklis. Like, there was a lot of stuff back in the early to mid 2000s that a very different landscape back then than what it has evolved into now. And truthfully, I haven't fully seen Fan Four Stick. I've only seen bits and pieces. I've never actually sat down to watch that movie all the way through. And of course, I'm told I don't need to. Many people have said that I don't need to. But we come into First Steps. We come into this movie in an interesting perspective, at least for me, an interesting perspective. Because one, you know, like I had to look at it and go, all right, well, being a part of Marvel Studios, being a part of that very successful, highly successful studio for the last 17 and a half years, one would think, I'm supremely confident that this particular Fantastic Four film is going to be the best Fantastic Four film that we have seen today. Yes, going into it, I'm like, yeah, it'll be better than either of the Tim Story films. It'll probably be better than Fan Four Stick. And this is before trailers. This is just knowing that they were going to do it. It's like, okay, because the pedigree is there. Right, the pedigree and the track record is there for Marvel Studios. It's like, okay, we know that how successful they've been and what they've done with these franchises. This is not the first time that they brought something over from Fox and really turned it into something special, because they already did that with Daredevil. That's the other biggest one that I can think of. Now, Spider-Man, of course, being a Sony property, has succeeded in that regard. So, like in the MCU, but Spider-Man succeeds regardless, right? Whether it's Sony or Marvel Studios. Spider-Man, of course, is, you know, god tier like Batman does. Those two don't fail. They just really do not fail. But either way, for me, I did not go into this film with low expectations. That being said, I also wasn't expecting it to be like, oh my goodness, this incredible. Like, I wasn't thinking Captain Marvel numbers or like Black Panther numbers. And again, we'll talk about box office later on. But no, I did not have those expectations with respect to what I thought, you know, the perception and the reception rather of Fantastic Four was going to be. I said, oh no, this is going to be a successful film. It is going to be a successful movie. Like, it's going to be a movie that I enjoy. And coming from Matt Shakman, a director that, you know, his prior claim to fame before this film is WandaVision, right? He's primarily a television director. He's directed one other feature film before this, a movie called Cut Bank, way back in 2014 that has a pretty solid cast. Liam Hemsworth, Teresa Palmer, Billy Bob Thornton, Bruce Stern, Michael Stuhlbarg, Oliver Platt, John Malkovich. But it's an indie film, right? It's not like a big, huge budget film, right? This is his first big budget, major franchise tentpole, if you will, that he was directing. But still, what he did with WandaVision, it was like, okay, no, he did a phenomenal job with the inaugural MCU TV series. So why would we not be somewhat confident with what he will do with Marvel's first family, right? So I didn't come into this with incredibly low expectations, but I also didn't come into it with incredibly unrealistic expectations, right? It was one of those cases where I have the confidence that this is going to be another film that I enjoy. The question is, how much will I enjoy it? So, with all the pedigree and whatnot behind it, what were my thoughts with respect to Fantastic Four First Steps? High level thoughts. I enjoyed it. Of course, I enjoyed it. It really is, pun intended, a fantastic film. To be honest with you, and it's one of those where like I like the idea that it is a standalone film and that it does give us something of a break in terms of having to worry about MCU continuity, and we overblow the worries about MCU continuity. I've talked about this before about how the general audience does not care nearly as much as we do with respect to continuity between all the films and, hey, does this line up here? Does that match up there? No, the general audience goes and they will see whatever Marvel or DC movies they wish to see, and they will enjoy them as they will. And whether they're left hanging off a cliff or not, they don't necessarily have the inclination to keep going. They don't need the next thing to be teased in that regard. And it was reassuring. It was actually comforting to be able to tell one of my coworkers, I had a coworker a couple of days ago that said her and her friends wanted to go see the film, but they were concerned about the homework problem because, again, this is the 37th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I just want to take this time to point out, specifically for John and others, that my streak continues. My streak is maintained. That is 37 Marvel Cinematic Universe films that I have all watched all in the theater. Yes, theatrical releases. I maintain my streak without question, but so they were worried about the homework problem. My coworker was, and it was reassuring to let her know that you don't have to worry about that. Complete standalone. This connects to nothing else. You will see them later in Avengers Doomsday next year, but for right now, there are no precursors. There's nothing you had to have seen beforehand in order to be prepared for this. I would even say that you don't even need to see previous Fantastic Four films. You do not. This film does treat origin story differently, right? It is not a history lesson in the like the traditional sense that that we're used to seeing, especially in the old DCEU days, right? And even Marvel history lessons. Like Marvel really doesn't do history lessons though; they do flashbacks. That is a lot of what you see here with respect to the explanation, but you get a very clear picture of what Marvel's first family is in this film, how they operate, what they do, how the world perceives them, which is vitally important with respect to this particular film. So this one stands alone as a great, in its own right, a great reboot of the Fantastic Four as a concept for everybody involved, for the audience itself in that regard. And I think it's definitely one of Marvel's stronger standalone films in that regard. When I first saw it, when I posted my TikTok review, and this was fresh. This was minutes out of me leaving the theater, and I'm sitting in my car just marinating over all of it, and I've had a couple of days since then to like refine my position. But at the time, I said that I didn't know if the movie was high tier, if it was low high tier MCU, or if it was high mid tier MCU. I knew it wasn't low tier. There's no way that this film was, and it wasn't going to be low tier. I knew it was not going to be a low tier MCU. And just to reiterate for people, I did an episode of, I think it was Flight Chat or whatnot, some months ago. I think it was in preparation for Brave New World. I think I did it before Brave New World, yes, where I renumbered my rankings for the MCU. And I broke it up into 3 tiers: high tier, mid tier, low tier. And until this movie, they were very evenly like spaced out at 12 movies apiece because it was 36 movies. And now I'm off by 1 again, thanks to 37 being an odd number. Great. So now I've got to figure that out. I think what it is the high and mid tiers are going to stay at 12, like, within 12 movies each, and then the lower tier will probably have the extra film. I guess it really depends on where I think, it sits with other movies. But in looking at my list, Fantastic Four is definitely high tier. It's absolutely high tier. And there are still some Marvel Cinematic Universe films that I would put ahead of it. There most certainly are. But I definitely think it is a high tier film with respect to it. And I still haven't 100% figured out exactly where I'm going to put it on my list, and here's why. Because I've also figured out, and this is something that Superman also helped me figure out, because to me, like, my sensibilities and how I process these films have changed as I've gotten older over the years, right? And a lot of times, like, one viewing, I feel like Brent and I used to have this thing we used to talk about on Fans Without Borders about how one viewing, you shouldn't need more than one viewing to know how you feel about a movie. If you need more than one viewing, then the question, it would call into question, like, how much did you really enjoy that film? Well, I will say for us, I've changed my mind on that particular perspective, because I think that for those of us that are into this genre, for those of us that, like, wear our hearts on our sleeves and are emotionally connected to this genre, a lot of times, when we go into that first viewing, our tensions are heightened, if you will, for a variety of reasons. Not just because we want the film to do well, not just because we want to enjoy it, but because we're looking for things, right? We're not going to catch everything on a one viewing, on a first viewing. We may catch a lot, but I think that, and there's going to be things that we catch that other people are not going to catch. When I was talking about the movie on Vodka Stream with Dave and Chris Balga and Travis and Ben Everts, and William from Sci-Fi Center, like, there were things that they caught that I did not catch. And I'm sitting there like, okay, clearly, I watched the same movie that they did, but clearly they remember more than I did. They caught some Easter eggs that I wasn't looking for. So all that to say that I got to see it a second time. I'm going to see. I wasn't sure that I was going to see it a second time. I'm going to see it a second time. I am. I'm going to see it a second time, probably this week, and really, like, dive in and digest. Now that I know what the basic story is, now that I've seen the movie once. Now there's more things that I can catch, and that's what happened with Superman. We saw it that Tuesday Amazon Prime screening, and then 3 days later I saw it again. I caught way more and not just in terms of, like, Easter eggs and things in the film, but also pacing, and also, like, like, certain things with characters and understandings and whatnot. And my perspective of that film rose way up, right? It went from me giving it just an 8 out of 10 and saying that, it was below Man of Steel, to the point where I now consider Superman to be my 1B along with my 1A of Man of Steel, right? 1A, 1A, 1A. Yes, I just had to say that really quick. Anytime 1A comes up, that's a thing now. Either way, I'm going to see Fantastic Four again. So I'm going to wait until I see it a second time before I definitively give it a ranking in my MCU rankings. All I know is it's going to be high tier. It's absolutely going to be high tier. And you know what? I'm probably comfortable telling you that I would put it ahead of Spider-Man Homecoming and Captain America the First Avenger. I'm probably, like, comfortable, like, saying that. What I don't know, because that's my 11th and 12th. First Avenger and Homecoming are my 11th and 12th movies in my MCU rankings. What I'm not certain about, like, 7 through 10. Because 7 through 10 in my high tier of MCU rankings is Spider-Man No Way Home, Guardians Volume 3, Deadpool and Wolverine, and The Avengers, in that order, 7, 8, 9, and 10. I need to figure out where Fantastic Four sits with respect to those movies, right? So you might be listening to that going, well, wait a minute, Ray, does that mean that you're not going to rate it any higher than 7th? What are the 6 movies that you think are better than Fantastic Four First Steps? Well, I'll save that for the end of this review. But for right now, Fantastic Four First Steps is definitely a high-tier film for sure. And whether or not you agree with me on the 6 films that I think are ahead of it, we'll see about that. But before diving into that, let's talk about why I think Fantastic Four First Steps is absolutely a high-tier MCU film. It starts with the cast. The cast for Fantastic Four First Steps is phenomenal. There is not a weak link. There isn't. It's certainly not within the 4 main characters, right? Pedro Pascal is Pedro Pascal. Like, I feel like that dude's star has just risen exponentially in the last 10 years. Ever since the first, my first seeing him as Prince Oberyn in Game of Thrones, I would have never thought this dude was going to blow up. Like, his career was going to, like, explode the way that it has. And not just explode, but this dude has managed to find his way into all of the major nerd franchises except for Star Trek, right? He started in Game of Thrones, okay, cool. And then he finds his way into being Din Djarin, the Mandalorian. A Mandalorian character in Star Wars that many people are now preferring over Boba Fett, right? That could seem sacrilegious to some original trilogy fans, but there are people out there that think Din Djarin is a better Mandalorian than Boba Fett. And it's unfair because he's had 3 full seasons of a show and he's about to get a film next year, The Mandalorian and Grogu, right? And also Grogu being a part of that, helping him out with it, yes. But Pedro Pascal, like a major mark in terms of Star Wars. Then he gets Wonder Woman, right? He gets to play Maxwell Lord, and however you feel about that movie, however you feel about the way he played the character, he was still like himself. He was still good in that movie, right? And I am more forgiving of that movie than many others are. A lot of people do not care for that film, and I get why. It certainly was one of the lower rung DCEU films, which is saying something considering how not great the second half of that franchise was after all the Snyder movies. But either way, he does a DC movie, right? He's in The Last of Us, which is a big, an HBO directed video game adaptation, right? In that regard. So he gets notoriety there as far as nerddom is concerned. And now he's Reed Richards in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He's like the MCU's Reed Richards, and he's phenomenal as he is in just about everything that he does. Again, including Maxwell Lord in Wonder Woman 1984. And he's done so many other things. I mean, there's a whole lot of his catalog that I have not watched, that I'm not even mentioning here, that I'm sure many of you have watched, right? But he's phenomenal. He's a fantastic Reed Richards. I'm going to use the word fantastic to describe it's, if you want to take it pun intended, cool, but it really does describe like how really good this movie was. And it does start with him. He's a fantastic Reed Richards, and he does an excellent job of balancing what many have called the heart of Reed Richards, and also the scary analytical side of Reed Richards. And that's one of the things where like, I don't have like the comic like background with respect to Fantastic Four. I've only read one run of Fantastic Four, and that was all their tie-ins, their tie-in run during Civil War. So I don't have a whole lot of comic basis with Reed Richards. So I'm going off of other people's knowledge, and they tell me that this is a very accurate Reed Richards. This is very close to how Reed is in the comics, where he has his moments where he can seem rather monstrous and scary in terms of his calculations and what he's trying to do. And I mentioned that somebody on Threads had talked about how they were somewhat disappointed that Tony Stark is dead in the MCU, because they felt like Pedro's Reed Richards would balance really well and would mesh really well with Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark in that regard. And that's intriguing in terms of their whole suit around the world perspective, and what they suit of armor on the world and whatnot, and how they try to protect everyone at the risk of certain other liberties, if you will. So yeah, very intriguing. I mean, I only know of when he and Tony were the utmost fascists in the Civil War graphic novel, the Civil War like comic series in that regard. So yeah, Pedro was outstanding. I feel like, though, I do have to agree with the other guys who said that really the heart and soul of this group has got to be Vanessa Kirby as Sue Storm. She is the leader. She is the emotional and like grounded center for this group. She's the mother in that regard, which is a big part of it. And by the way, spoiler warning, spoilers. I will put it in the descriptor when I post the episode, of course, but spoilers with respect to this. But Vanessa Kirby plays, such a strong Sue Storm, a lot of agency. And that may be the biggest thing that I could say about all 4 of these is these characters, more than any other version of them in Fantastic Four, like as far as theatrically, all have a great deal of agency. And Sue's agency is second to none. I mean, absolutely up there. And it's refreshing to see, of course, like nowadays, this isn't something that I don't think we have to necessarily worry about, or maybe we do, with respect to all of this, all the anti-woke nonsense and all the MCU ridiculousness that we hear from the trolls on YouTube and everywhere else, right? It's like, okay, well, do we have to worry about whether or not these female characters, these strong female characters, are one, going to be strong, and two, going to continue to be given the agency that they need in order to move the plot forward and tell the story and give extra weight, depth, and dimension? And Vanessa Kirby absolutely was. She is putting on a clinic in regard to the emotional range that she has. I mean, not just in terms of the power set when she's in action, but also in terms of some of the big like dialogue scenes and the speeches that she gives. There's one big speech that she gives, in the middle of this, and that's not even my favorite part of her performance. My favorite part of her performance is, some of the more emotional beats where she's trying to keep the other 3 like centered and grounded in terms of what is happening, and giving the perspective of, okay, I realize that what is happening is not fair. I don't like what is happening, but I understand what needs to be done, and I'm going to make certain that it gets done, and I'm going to make certain that at the end of the day, we protect our family. We protect what we're going to do. We protect our own center, if you will, because this really is a family. And I'll talk more about that when I get into the writing, but it really is a family dynamic, and the chemistry between everyone in this primary cast, these primary four, is really good. It's the best. It, Everything that I'm saying here, it's the best we've seen with respect to this group, without question. The best Mr. Fantastic, right? The best Reed Richards, the best Sue Storm, Invisible Woman, for sure. The best Johnny Storm, Human Torch, without question. And I have not seen anything that Joseph Quinn has been in. No, I have not watched Stranger Things. I still, to this day, have not watched a single episode of Stranger Things. I don't know him as Eddie Munson. I have no idea. This is my first introduction to Joseph Quinn. I have seen none of his prior work, at least not that I think of. Here, let's look at film-wise. Nope, haven't seen A Quiet Place Day 1, haven't seen Gladiator 2, haven't seen Warfare, that's the Alex Garland written film directed by Ray Mendoza about Navy SEALs. Nope, have not seen that. And as far as TV goes, okay, I guess he was in an episode of Game of Thrones. I don't remember him. Game of Thrones, so much happens in that show, but I haven't seen that. I haven't seen Catherine the Great. I haven't seen Les Miserables. And like I said, I haven't seen Stranger Things. So I have no prior knowledge of Joseph Quinn until here. But what I really liked about his Johnny Storm here is that he not only has agency, but he's a polar opposite of what we've known Johnny Storm to be, at least for someone like me that is uninitiated to the comics, right? Largely uninitiated to Fantastic Four comics. If I'm judging this based as somebody who is, my basis in the Fantastic Four is only in the films, this is a 180 polar opposite of Chris Evans. This is nothing like Chris Evans. And I have to imagine it's very different than what Michael B. Jordan did in Fantastic, right? We don't like to think of Michael B. Jordan in that role anymore because he's done so much since then. But either way, like, this is a Johnny Storm that is not a womanizer, right? He's not doing the cringy, like, flirty shit that he's done, like, on screen in the past with women. Like, he still kind of has like a loosey-goosey, debonair, like, kind of like bro-man, like, personality, but it's not without, like it's surface level, and it doesn't permeate his entire being. He still is a viable part of this group. He is not a liability. That's the best way I could put it. He's not a liability. There are times in the previous Fantastic Four films where Chris Evans' version of Johnny Storm was a liability to the team. Joseph Quinn's version of this character is not a liability at all. And he has a major bit of business, a major scene where he really, like, where he discovers something important, critical to the story that is like, okay, that's awesome. It's my favorite scene of his because I like when these characters are given agency. And when you have an ensemble like this, there is a tendency to focus on a couple of characters more than the other. And I don't feel like that was the case here. I feel like there was a nice balance. Yeah, you could argue that Reed and Sue get primarily most of the screen time, if you will, and largely because of Franklin, right? Because of the son that they have that is, birthed in this scene crazily, and I'll talk about that as well in a little bit. But I do think that, Johnny Storm gets his flowers in this film. I also think that Ben Grimm, Eben Moss Backrack's Ben Grimm, the Thing, he gets his flowers, right? And what I like about how his character is portrayed, it's full CGI mocap, right? But the personality that he has, it's a lot different than how Michael Chiklis played it. But there are similarities where, he's not like depressed and like downtrodden, and he's also not one where, like, I felt like a lot of times in the previous Fantastic Four films it was like, well, he is supposed to be like the one that backs up Reed, and like when people try to bully Reed, he sticks up for Reed, and that wasn't the dynamic here at all. Like, the dynamic here is like, okay, they're friends, and they may be at odds themselves, but it's still in service of the family. Like, this really felt like a family unit. This really felt like an awesome family unit. Everybody together, everybody working together. And while they may have their quabbles, while they may have their disagreements, they still are working for the betterment of the family itself, right? This really was Marvel's first family. This really is Marvel's first family on display. And, he didn't have a mopey downward spiral. Like, he would speak to the public, no one treated him like an outcast or like this horrible thing, like that was like a freak of nature in that regard. Like, he was respected not only by his own family but also by the general public. And I like that dynamic. I like the way that they portrayed that, and just, he went about his life. I mean, yeah, he's now this rock creature. He's not going to revert back to his human form, and there are certainly times where we do see him in flashbacks where he's in his human form. But they didn't play with that type of like freak of nature dynamic. No, they just said no. He's everybody accepts him for what he is. It's about what he can do and about the agency that he brings. And again, just like the other three, he brings just as much agency to the table as the other three do. Like, he is just as important. Like, this is a case where you look at all four of these and it's like, okay, could this movie continue the way that it was going to if we remove any of the four of them out of it? And the answer is no. The answer is no. All four are necessary. All four contribute different things. All four have their moments. All four have their flowers. And I love that. That balance was handled extremely well. And maybe that's something that Max Chapman, being a television director, maybe that's a perspective that he brings. Because in television, you have to get used to dealing with ensemble casts. That's literally like kind of the blueprint for television series, is it's got to be ensemble. Like, okay, maybe you have a lead character or two here and there, but you're going to have supporting characters. You're going to have others step into the fray. And a lot of times with a show, you're going to have a supporting cast where, like, that poster isn't just one or two people. That poster is like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people sometimes, right? Especially if you're dealing with a Star Trek series, right? So you've got to know how to balance all those characters and all those personalities in one sitting. And I mean, it's tough enough to do over the course of a 9 episode television series, even tougher in what ends up being an hour and 55-minute long movie in that regard, right? So I think kudos to Matt Shakman and everybody else involved for being able to achieve that balance, and certainly kudos to this cast, because they most certainly handled the balance as organically as possible and really made it feel like we were watching a family unit of superheroes. Like, it really was that. And I really like that. That part of the dynamic was really, really well done. Hats off to Pedro, Vanessa, Eben, and Joseph for how well they did, how well they were able to play that off, and how organic their entire like family unit was in that regard. Beyond that, as far as major players, I mean, there's really two other major players to talk about as far as cast. I mean, we've got other supporting cast members that do their job. Paul Walter Hauser does his job. Natasha Lyonne, for the smattering that she was in the film, she does her job, and I'll talk about that a little bit with respect to the when I get into the writing here. Mark Gatiss does his job. Mark Gatiss, of course, I mean, that's Mycroft from the Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman Sherlock. I was about to say movies. They're television episodes in movie length, right? Because they're like 90-minute episodes back in the day when they were doing that for a while. And of course, he's also been a big part of Doctor Who, the resurgence of Doctor Who from 2005 on in that regard. So I'm very familiar with Mark Gatiss. He's been in a ton of other things as well. But the two big ones, the two big cast members, obviously, to talk about are Julia Garner and Ralph Ineson. Julia Garner, of course, as Shalabal, the female Silver Surfer, and, for all of that nonsense, for all of that ridiculousness, all that bullshit, bigoted posturing that was happening when she was cast and when it was very clear that it was going to be a female Silver Surfer. Obviously, she played the role extremely well, and, like brought to the role what you're supposed to bring to that role, the gravitas and the power and the emotional vulnerability at the time when necessary. Like, Julia Garner does a fantastic job with respect to it. And, the visual effects do complement her, and I'll talk about this as well when I get to visual effects, in terms of not hiding her performance and allowing us to see the full weight of how all of this is coming down upon her, and how this was portrayed in Rise of the Silver Surfer with one line where it's like, I have no choice. Well, it's the same thing here with Shalabal, right? Just as it was with Norrin Radd in that film. She has no choice, but we are led to understand, one, why she has no choice, and two, how the weight of having no choice is weighing on her, because she feels like she is doing this for a greater personal good, despite the catastrophic consequences that this is leading to, and the weight of her actions, right? And that's probably that scene with her and Johnny Storm, probably, like, that's my favorite scene for the both of them, because it's not just his agency, it's also her guilt. It's the power of her guilt that is it just all comes rushing out in that regard. And Julia Garner, I have no complaints. I have zero complaints about how Julia Garner played the female Silver Surfer. And I also have even less complaints about Ralph Ineson playing Galactus. And one of the things that came up that Chris brought up on Vodka Stream, and others have talked about this. We'll talk about this further. Is just the Jack Kirby influence that is so heavy in the Fantastic Four film. That it's just that Jack Kirby, of course, for those who are unaware, the creator of the Fantastic Four, right? In concert with Stan Lee, because of course, as we've come to realize, as we've come to find out over the years, is that Marvel Comics is not all Stan Lee, right? He may be considered the godfather of all of it, but there were so many others. Steve Ditko, of course, with Spider-Man, Jim Starlin with Thanos, and in this case, Jack Kirby with the Fantastic Four, right? And there's so much of an influence in terms of his art style and in terms of his direction and how he created these characters that is here, and perhaps Galactus is the biggest interpretation of that. And yeah, I will admit, Iman Vellani's post, I think it was a tweet or whatnot, where she was just excited that Galactus had moved from, like poisonous cloud, from threatening cloud moments, like that's how Galactus was represented for people who don't know. In Rise of the Silver Surfer, he's just this giant purple cloud of whatever, to actually being the manifestation of what he looks like in the comics, like being a real Galactus, and just the threat that he imposed. Ralph Ineson, and I didn't realize this, like I felt like a lot of it was CGI, like a lot of it was visual effects, but I mean there was so much more practically done with his costume and with his look. And I saw the behind the scenes pictures because one of the things that they're doing now, and I guess they've done this for years, but I've definitely noticed it with Superman, and certainly also now with Fantastic Four over the last couple of days, is they're posting the behind the scenes images of people on set after the movie releases. And I saw a behind the scenes image of Ralph Ineson, a picture that he took in the Galactus costume, like on set, and it's like, wow, okay, so that's him, like, the mannerisms and the appearance and the voice, like that's all him. And it's just, it's very imposing, it's very threatening, it's very frightening, and it's very well done. The scope and scale, the epic nature of this villain, it is one of the better Marvel villains without question, right? And certainly I would say it's interesting because it's not like he necessarily gets a ton of depth, right? He doesn't get a Thanos level of depth. He doesn't get a Killmonger level of depth in that regard. But what he represents, what he presents to this team is absolutely strong enough to be considered holy shit. How on earth could they possibly take this guy out? How could they deal with this guy? How is this problem going to be resolved, right? Like the imposing will and the dominance of the character is absolutely on display. Ralph Ineson does a fantastic job. I have zero complaints. I really do. I have no complaints with respect to any of the primary 6 cast members in this film. The Fantastic Four themselves, and then your villains, with respect to Silver Surfer and Galactus. All 6 of them, phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal, and do just an outstanding job throughout this entire film, and work very well in concert with each other. Work extremely well to play their roles. I have no complaints. All of them. Pedro Pascal, Vanessa Kirby, Ebon Moss-Bachrach, Joseph Quinn, Julia Garner, and Ralph Ineson. Phenomenal. Outstanding job. And the rest of the supporting cast, again, I think they fill their roles very well. I will call attention to Sarah Niles for a little bit. A black English actress that's been in Ted Lasso and a number of other things. I don't think I've seen anything that she has been in, to be honest with you. She's done a lot of TV, but she is one of the supporting characters. She's basically like the assistant to the First Family, the assistant to the Fantastic Four, and what she does, as far as like supporting and kind of the bridge, if you will. Her character is the bridge between like all of the regular people, like, the working class and whatnot. She's the CEO. That's what she is. Her name is Lynn Nichols, the CEO of the Future Foundation, right? And I don't know, like, what the comic background of the character is, but she was very good in support. I liked her being kind of like the temporary bridge, almost like, like Pepper, right? Like Pepper Potts, like, I mean, not in terms of, we don't see a ton with her, but just, handling the press, the press appearances, the press conferences, and the speaking engagements, and like telling the reporters one at a time with questions and that type of thing, right? Just handling the appearances on, Ted Gilbert's show, that Smart Gaddis's character, right? Like all of that, that's important stuff that's necessary. Like little things you just have to like dot your I's and cross your T's with respect to filling out a world in a film like this. And I think she did a strong job with that. I mentioned Paul Walter Hauser as Harvey Elder, Mole Man. I got a real Incredibles vibe with respect to, remember the end of the Incredibles movie? I think it was a similar like type of character, but I got that kind of vibe with him, and I know that he probably comes from the comics as well. This is another one of those cases where it does kind of lead me to be curious about like reading the comics, like going forward. Like, hey, I like, can I get a closer basis since we've gone so comic booky into the aesthetic with this particular film? With respect to characters and presentation. Like, I am intrigued with respect to that. I don't know how soon I'll read Fantastic Four comics, but it's definitely on the list with respect to that. Oh, I also need to mention Herbie. I can't forget Matthew Wood. Remember Matthew Wood? Matthew Wood is like, he's been in the business for a long time, but he was General Grievous. He was the voice actor for General Grievous way back when in Revenge of the Sith, and he's got so many other credits as well. But that's what I always remember him from. He's a sound editor and a voice actor. He's done a ton of other stuff. But he's Herbie, and Herbie. To me, Herbie gave me like a friendlier Chopper vibe, right? Because like they give him sound effects. Like, he doesn't speak in English, like in words, but he says things, and you get the idea of what his emotions are. And the second, when I go to see this movie again, I'm gonna remember exactly what the scene was, because I couldn't remember this the other night. But there's a point where he says WTF, like he says what the bleep, like he says that, and in tone form, and I got a chuckle. I chuckled at that when I saw that in the film. And they, to give him like human emotions, like when they do the thing with the robot where they give the robot human emotions but not the actual human speech. I dig that. I really like that, like, because I love Chopper, right, in Rebels and in Ahsoka, and so it's cool that Herbie, they gave him that type of personification in this film. So yeah, can't forget him. But yeah, I really don't have any major complaints about casting with respect to this particular film. It's A1 casting all the way through. So when it comes to the writing for Fantastic Four, this is where I was surprised the most, because I was not expecting this film to be nearly as cosmic and sci-fi as it ended up being. Like, this is truly, like, somebody like made a comparison to Interstellar, and visually speaking, yes, I will agree. Visually speaking, especially all the space stuff in the second act, Interstellar level. Yes, absolutely, I will agree with that. But I was not expecting the level of comic book science and science fiction and cosmic nature. Like, when they decide, because we get the intro, like the first act is really the intro of the Fantastic Four, and showing us not only, like how they came to be and their relation to this world, but also how this world works. And the retro sci-fi like aspect of this world, like the retro aspect, like this is in the 60s, it's the retro future aspect of this. Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. When you give me like all that film grain and the old documentary style and like the voiceovers and all that, that's fantastic. I love that. But also just in terms of how the world is behaving, how characters and how everybody, like all the lay people are behaving, right? It is like quintessential 60s Americana in that regard, but peaceful 60s Americana, right? We're not headed toward, this isn't an Earth 828, because this is a totally different Earth, right? This isn't an Earth that is headed towards the Vietnam War, right? This isn't an Earth that is headed towards like Iran Contra and all the other strife and struggles and tribulations that happen post 60s into 70s and 80s. Like, this is not a world that is headed into that regard, and that's important, because for this world for this movie to operate the way that it does, you have to adapt that this is an otherworldly 1960s America, an otherworldly 1960s world, so that you can believe that they believe in the Fantastic Four so much that when they call upon them to build these machines to help move the Earth away from Galactus, that they will be able, that they'll do so, like the largest effort in human history to put all this together in a short period of time, and also the whole thing about, I forgot about this, the whole thing about how they had to conserve power, so cities have to like voluntarily go on blackouts in order to conserve power in order to build this up, right? And it's all about their belief in the Fantastic Four, and you don't get to that point of belief if you are in a world that is incredibly skeptical. Like, there's no way that would happen today, like not in our world whatsoever. So this is absolutely otherworld. Like, this is a multiverse where humanity is way more peaceful and way more like together. Like, I didn't even see like a lack of diversity, right? I saw brown people everywhere. Like, I saw them about, like, like there wasn't this, like it wasn't a completely white male dichotomy that was dominating things. I mean, yes, Ted Gilbert was hosting the show, and yes, you still had them in positions of power. But like I said, you had Sarah Niles' character Lynn there, and you had other reporters and whatnot there. Like you saw the diversity even in this 1960s world and whatnot, and never was that called into question. So clearly, this is not our Earth. This is not our world. This is not our history, and that's important to get that down pat. And you got to understand that in that first hour with respect to where the Fantastic Four, like how they operate and how this world operates. And then you get to that second act when the threat is presented to them and they do their research and discover all the other worlds that Galactus has destroyed. And then they decide to get in their ship and travel to him. And it's like, really? That threw me for a loop in the theater. Was not expecting that whatsoever. I'm like, we're going to space. We're going to space. They're going to talk to Galactus and reason. We're gonna get space, like actual space. Like and not that we haven't had space scenes before in the MCU, but not like this. Not like this. No, 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 no. I mean, the Forge stuff in Infinity War and like the space stuff and Ebony Moss ship and all that. Okay, that's fine, right? And being on a completely other planet with Thanos trying to get the gauntlet off him, that's fine. But this is different. This is very. A lot of this reminded me of like Dormammu. I've come to bargain, but again, it's in space. They're traveling to see him, right? There's space science fiction happening here in addition to all of the cosmic sci-fi stuff. It's like we're transcending some boundaries here. And the decision was clearly made to have this particular film lean more heavily into the comic book aspects of the Fantastic Four than any other MCU film prior. This film does that. I mean, and I talked about this with Superman, about how even in the MCU, there is still a grounded nature of real people that are reacting to, okay, now I live in a world with people that have magic and people that have super, like suits of iron and repulsor blasters and all these other crazy things and enhanced individuals and aliens and whatnot, right? And there's still people that like kind of represent us in the real world in the MCU. And this is an Earth clearly where they're like, nah, we accept that the Fantastic Four are like our greatest heroes. They protect the Earth from otherworldly threats, and they're going to fly intergalactically to go defeat Galactus, right? That's just accepted and understood in that regard, in a cosmic sense, right? Suspension of disbelief has never been higher with an MCU film, and I applaud them for that. I do, because I like that. I do like that. I think we're at that point now, guys. Seriously, we've come a long way from putting the X-Men in the black leather outfits and not allowing them to have their own like comic book accurate stuff with yellow spandex, etc. and whatnot. Right? We've come a long way from that. We're not afraid of this anymore. It's not about like, well, will the general audience think it's goofy? No, they won't. Because we've had so much of it in the last 20 years alone, just from Marvel alone, right? And even before that, and even alongside that with what DC's been doing as well, like we're at that point where the general audience is ready to suspend disbelief as much as they need to, right? There's so many unrealistic things in this film, but it doesn't matter. We're all initiated to that. And the comic book, like the comic book science certainly doesn't bother me being a Star Trek fan. I've been used to technobabble my whole life. So all the stuff that Reed was writing on the boards, like all the equations and whatnot, is it even real? Probably not. Don't give a shit. He's the smartest guy in this movie. He's figured it out. Okay, here we go. And and again, the family unit and the agency stuff that we saw in the cosmic part of the script, in the middle of the movie was all there. Like it all played out extremely well. It was all very well written as far as being, diegetic in that regard. And then when you get into the crux of the story, this whole idea that Galactus wants their child. Well, why do they want Franklin? Because Franklin apparently is him. Franklin is like tough shit. Like Franklin has some massive powers. He apparently is more powerful than Reed and Sue combined. Like he's got some abilities, right? And it is crazy, now that I think about it, the scene where he is actually born is crazier than the scene where James T. Kirk is born in the first Kelvin Timeline Star Trek film. And that's a scene where he was born cheating death, right? The whole point is that his mother and others are escaping in a shuttlecraft as the Kelvin is being destroyed by a giant Romulan aggressor from 129 years in the future, right? And he is literally born cheating death. And it's a crazy scene. It's a chaotic scene. It's an emotional scene, and it's kind of the same thing here. Like, this is even crazier. Like, okay, they're trying to get away from Galactus. The Silver Surfer is literally trying to steal the baby mid-birth, and it's all like she's in labor. She's got, this is arguably like the toughest that she has to be. Like, she's giving birth to her son while trying to escape death, and while trying to elude a celestial being and his underling, his very powerful underling, attacking them in space, on a spaceship. Like, it's crazy, it's insane, it's unbelievable, it's powerful, it's emotional, it's all of the above. It's really good. It's really, really well done. It's really good. I really like it. And it really does signify a place that Marvel has not gone to before, as far as putting all that together and going full cosmic comic booky science fiction in a film like this. It's really good. I really like it. Really enjoy it. Like, and we talked about that the other day on Vodka Stream, about how incredible that second act is. And then even getting into the third act, the whole the realization that, they, first of all, the public dealing with the fact that they didn't defeat Galactus. And then, making it publicly known, like, yes, he wanted our son, and we're not going to give up our son. And they were perfectly okay with that. It's the trolley problem. And it's funny how, like, people have talked about Superman, not to compare this so much to Superman, but we can talk about this in proximity to Superman if we have a rational conversation about it. There were people that said that Superman avoided the trolley problem because he does what he can to try and save everybody, right? Which is, I guess, and not, at the expense of others in that regard. Where this movie, Fantastic Four First Steps, I mean, it leans straight into the trolley problem. They chose their son over the rest of the planet in that moment because they were a family and they were protecting their family. And obviously, the rest of the planet is like, what the WTF? One baby as opposed to billions of us. How dare you? That type of deal. And that's where the speech that Sue gives, and it only works in a world like this, where skepticism is not nearly as high as our real world, or not even as high as, like, Vietnam War era, like, Americana and that kind of stuff, like in the real world, right? Like, their belief in the Fantastic Four is so high, and their world is so, like, together, if you will, in that regard, that they're like, okay, we got it. We got you. We understand, right? When she makes that impassioned plea, they go with it. They understand. Like, it is a perspective that, like, they don't still come for her and her child. They're not still angry. They're like, okay, we believe in them. We believe in her. We're going to trust them. And so that's when it really gets into the scary part, because Reed realizes that they've got to, like, use Franklin as bait. And that's a scene that I really love, because he comes to the realization, but he knows that Sue doesn't like that realization. Like, the calculated part of his brain is like, we have to, but he's telling Sue, I will find another way around it. And Sue's telling him, no, you're not. I hate that we have to do this, but there's no other way. I know that you're right. So it's this weird fight. It's not even really a fight. It's just, they both agree that they have to use their son as bait, but he's trying to find another way around it so that she won't be pissed, and she is angrily saying, there is no other way. I hate to admit this, but you're right, you asshole. We have to use him as bait. And in the middle of this, you got Johnny and you got Ben. Just, they're on Sue's side saying, "Oh, we can't do this. This is a horrible idea." But Sue is the one, again, telling the others, "No, we have to. This is my child, and I don't want to put him in harm's way, but we have to. There's no other way. There's no other choice. We have to do this." And I love the point where she comes to that realization, and, like, her definitive, like, putting her foot down was when she had, like, kind of that primal scream, and she just went invisible for a second, just because all the emotions overtook her. She's like, damn it, I don't want to do this. This is a horrible idea, but it is literally our only choice. And it leads it, and that's why she fights as hard as she does at the end of the movie, right? The point where they lure Galactus out of his ship, and their original plan didn't work, where they were going to try and move the Earth, and that also blew me away. It's like, okay, so Reed spent this whole time building a transporter, and he successfully figured out how to transport an egg from point A to point B, right? And his solution is, we're going to build a worldwide version of this transporter to move the Earth to a different part of the galaxy. Move the Earth? We got to cosmic really fast in this film. Move the Earth. No one on 616 in the MCU proper has even remotely thought of the idea of moving the Earth, right? Like hiding it from Thanos or something like that. This movie went so far off the reservation of suspension of disbelief, and I love it. I do, because this is a cosmic thing. This is what you would see in the comics. This is the type of crazy shit that you would see. This is a crazy enough type plan that you would see Reed Richards or somebody come up with in the comics. And again, I have to read Fantastic Four comics, but I could just think of a comic scenario where it's like, okay, move the planet, right? Last time I saw a scenario like this involving like changing the Earth itself was an episode of Futurama where literally the Earth was like rotating on a different axis in order to stave off a catastrophe from like the cats that were trying to like siphon the energy for their home planet, right? Anybody ever watched Futurama? That was in one of the Comedy Central seasons. That's like one of the better episodes in the Comedy Central seasons. But that's the last time I heard of anybody thinking of something like this. This has never been like attempted in like live action, not that I can think of. Not this cosmic. We're going to move the Earth to a different place and hide it from Galactus. And everybody goes along with it. And the plan was working until Silver Surfer, came out of nowhere and destroyed all and that's where we get into her scene where Johnny, he figures out her language and speaks to her, finds out her history, discovers that, yeah, you've been helping him for a minute to spare your own people, and you are responsible for the deaths of countless billions on other worlds. How do you feel about that? And he's doing this as an impassioned plea not to do it to the Earth, but that guilt overwhelms her, and it overtakes her, and she runs off. And she's basically persona non grata, even though you know exactly what's going to happen at the end of the movie. And sure enough, you get to the end of the movie where now the new plan is, okay, if we're not going to send the Earth to a different place, we're going to send Galactus to a different place. So the portal that we still have here in like New York, where the Baxter Building is at, like we got to lure him here and push him into it. And that whole end sequence where Sue calls upon all of the power that she's got. And this is where I discovered how powerful Sue Storm is. Had no idea she was this powerful. I mean, she is pushing this giant celestial asshole toward this portal with everything she has. And yes, they did remove the blood that was totally in the trailer shot from this particular film. Probably MPAA standards nonsense, more than likely, to keep it a PG-13. Whatever. But she's pushing this dude with everything she's flippin' got in terms of her power set. And it's not enough. They need one final shot. And of course, Johnny's going to do the self-sacrificing thing. But I knew what was going to happen. Like from the beginning. And I'm not saying this isn't a detraction. It's just you watch enough of these movies and you're so initiated into this, you could see what's going to happen. Silver Surfer's been gone for the last half hour, after Johnny gave her the massive guilt trip. So clearly what's going to happen is he's going to, give the whole tell Franklin that his uncle loved him, that whole deal. I'm paraphrasing what he said because I honestly couldn't hear it that clearly first time that I saw it, but that's what the guys were saying that he said. And he's going to do his final charge to push Galactus into the black hole, and clearly he gets knocked off course at the last second by Silver Surfer, who comes in and she provides that final shot, and she pushes both herself and Galactus into that black hole, and bam, they're gone. Plan, works in that regard. Like I saw that coming a mile away. It doesn't detract from the movie for me. It's just you see enough of these, you know how that's going to play out, and it was satisfying. It was absolutely satisfying because that was what I was expecting to happen. And then the ultimate realization of Franklin's powers, which is Sue dies. Sue's dead. They try to revive her, doesn't work. Franklin, as a baby, brings her back to life. Restores her life force, if you will. And so now it's the realization to the family. I'm not calling them the team. I'm calling them the family. They are the first family here. And that's what they really feel like in this film. It's the revelation to the family that Franklin is him. Franklin is, like that power, if you will, like as far as being more powerful than any of the rest of them in that regard. And what on earth could that possibly mean for his evolution as an individual, as a character in that regard? So yeah, remains to be seen. But yeah, Franklin as a baby, as a newborn, no less, right? And yes, I'll talk a little bit about the visuals here in a second. But yeah, I really dig this story as far as how it was constructed, and I really didn't see any holes or any there was nothing in it to me that necessarily felt like shafted. The only thing that really I could call into question with respect to how the story was constructed had to do with the editing, and that is, clearly they shot more sequences than we saw in this film, and I mean they whittled this down. We heard like a couple weeks prior that John Malkovich, who was supposed to play a villain in the film, had been cut out of the film entirely. And they got the runtime down to under 2 hours at an hour and 55 minutes. And ordinarily, when you hear something like this being done in post production, it's definitely a cause for concern with respect to a film like this. And somehow, over the last 17 and a half years, Marvel Studios has just found a way to make it work. Like, they can do this. Like, this is how they've perfected the assembly line process. They can make these cuts at the last second, and really reduce, like, I feel like a real big, like, indicator of this is how much Natasha Lyonne's character was cut out. Clearly, she had some more stuff going on with Ben. It reminded me of the same dynamic as Kerry Washington's character had with Michael Chiklis' version in the Tim Story movies, right? They were clearly trying to establish a similar type of dynamic, right? Like Ben and this woman being involved in stuff, right? The Thing is involved with another girl, but they cut so much of it out. I feel like there's a lot of it on the cutting room floor. We barely saw Natasha Lyonne in this film. Like, we really just didn't see a whole lot of her at all. She's in the film maybe a grand total of 5 to 10 minutes, if that, to be honest with you. And yet, it didn't detract from the story. It didn't detract from I didn't feel like it affected the pacing. I didn't feel like, could I have taken 10 to 15 more minutes of this movie? Yes, I could have. But I feel like also in the same vein as Superman, because people have said that about Superman, and I would take 10 to 15 more minutes of that movie as well. But I still feel like both films do what they need to do in their time frames to still work and to still, like, organically proceed, right? I don't feel that it detracted the film. I feel like this film being an hour and 55 minutes, it's still, I remember my old school sweet spot where I said no less than an hour and 50 minutes, and I use Star Trek First Contact as my model for that. This is 5 minutes over that, like if I was going with my old runtime logic. But my runtime logic now is, as much time as you need to be able to convey the story. And if an hour and 55 minutes is all they needed, then it worked, in my opinion. It most certainly worked for this particular film. So I really don't have any complaints with respect to that. It is something that I noticed, that yes, the editing process did hit this film late. Unfortunately, for me, subjectively speaking, it did not impact the story. It did not impact the progression of what was happening in that regard. Marvel just knows how to make that work. And, it doesn't work the same way all the time, right? That's why there are tiers, right? Sometimes it works better like this, high tier. Sometimes it works okay, well enough for like mid tier. Sometimes it doesn't work all that well for like the low tier films, right? Like, the assembly line process doesn't always work the same way, but it has been consistently successful for 17 plus years for Marvel Studios in that regard. And I think it's certainly successful here with respect to how this film is written and composed. I have one visual effects complaint. One. And you know me, I am very, forgiving with respect to visual effects and visuals in general with these films. I have one complaint, and if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm going to say. Franklin. And it's one of those things where, and I brought this up again the other day. I said, if you're going to involve a baby in the action, then just go ahead and go for broke and make the baby unrealistic, like Baby Joey in Superman. Like that was more understanding, because it's okay, well, when you see who the father is and when you see the circumstances surrounding that, all right, the baby's going to look otherworldly. The baby's just going to look fake. And they went full bore into it. They made it animated. They made it kind of cartoonish in that regard, but it worked for what that scene did. This is the case where they tried to make Franklin look too real. And I get why, because you're supposed to showcase him saving Sue's life. You're supposed to show him close up, he's aging, he's doing this, whatever, right? But it didn't work for me. It did not work for me in that regard. And it takes me a while. It didn't take me out of the movie. It didn't ruin the ending of the movie for me whatsoever, because I don't let visual effects necessarily take me out of a movie like that. But it did remind me of the baby saving scene from The Flash. It did. As far as how those babies were animated. And that's another scenario where, and that's not one of my favorite scenes in The Flash anyway, even though I really do like that movie. But it is one of those cases where, again, I feel like if you're going to do that, if you're going to put a baby in the middle of the action, if you're going to have the baby do something, then just go for broke and make it cartoony. Just don't. And I realize that the difficulty, because you've got everything else somewhat grounded. But I feel like there may have been a way aesthetically that they could have done it and still made it work. I don't know. But they were trying to make it look too human, and it just came off Ally McBeal forced in that regard. I didn't really care for it, but that's it. Visually speaking, I don't have any other complaints. I really don't. I like how this movie's shot. like all the retro futuristic stuff I talked about, in terms of the film grain of the cameras and the footage and the voiceovers and just the setting. I love the whole, like the Ted Gilbert show was an ABC special presentation. They got all the old ABC graphics to use for that. And they really gave this like a retro 60s feel. It was like we were watching a film that literally did take place in the 1960s. All of that was phenomenal. I thought they got the retro future stuff down pat. The way the cars operate, the way the tech operates, the push button, old futuristic style, of how they thought the future was going to be based on their own perspectives. And we've seen like old, like concepts of that from the 60s. Like they nailed that. They got that aesthetic down pat. They really did a phenomenal job. And that's apart from all the cosmic space stuff that happens in the second act. And also Galactus himself and, the nods to the Jack Kirby aesthetic and all that. Like all of that was really, really well done. Franklin is the only complaint. The only complaint that I have visually. I feel like everything else really, really well done visually speaking with respect to and the manifestation of their powers as well, right? And I feel like of anybody, like maybe we saw less of the Thing's powers than we did of everybody else's. I mean, we certainly saw his strength being displayed multiple times, but I feel like his agency was more of like his ingenuity, like being a pilot and doing all that. Like that, we saw way more of that, with respect to, his character, right? We see Johnny, we see his powers. And yes, I will say that there was that part of me was like, okay, well, everything he's wearing is flame retardant. Like they never dealt with that. They just pushed that off to the side. Like, nope, he doesn't burn his clothes. He doesn't have to change clothes. They dealt with that like not at all, right? And again, it was one of those things where it's just like, it doesn't take me out of the movie. I forgive it based on the aesthetic that you have crafted for this film. So it doesn't bother me. It's just something that I notice in that regard, right? But we saw his powers, we see Sue's powers, and even Reed's abilities, like with his stretching. Like it wasn't cartoony, right? Like for the way that he did it, they didn't treat it as a joke or a punchline or anything like that. They actually were able to represent it in this world, in this film, as like the bona fide power, where it wasn't like, made to be a joke. It wasn't made to look cartoonish or rubbery or anything like that. Like to me, it fit really well. Similar to how, they made, Guy Gardner's Green Lantern's powers work, similarly in that film, in Superman. So yeah, I don't have any visual complaints outside of how they designed Franklin and how they animated Franklin, really, to be honest with you. Only complaint I have visually. Everything else is immaculate and impeccable in this film, visually speaking. You know what else is immaculate and impeccable in this film? Michael effing Giacchino. That's who. Okay, and Michael Giacchino, I mean, was already like top 5. He's probably top 3 now as far as like composers. And I don't know why it didn't occur to me that he would be scoring this film, because there was nobody else more appropriate to score this film. Why? Because not only is he a veteran of scoring Marvel films as well, because as we look at his list, I know he did the Spider-Man films with respect to the MCU prior. He did Werewolf by Night, right? Like that's, in fact, he directed Werewolf by Night, which I still need to watch on Disney Plus. That is part of the Marvel like complexity that I have not watched in that regard. But not only is he a veteran of the MCU and Marvel Studios, but he's also the man that composed the score for The Incredibles, right? And haven't so many people called The Incredibles the best Fantastic Four movie made till now, right? Now it's first steps in this regard. But the guy that did the score for The Incredibles, obviously, perfect choice for Fantastic Four First Steps. And not just because of that, but also because the time frame, the time perspective, like where this movie takes place, it works. That's what Incredibles was. Incredibles had the 60s spy vibe, and he did that incredibly well. He understands the period, if you will, as far as what it's supposed to sound like and how epic it's supposed to go. And I mean, there are points in this score where it's just like, the gravitas and the scope and scale of what they're doing and what we're seeing on screen is massively portrayed. And just you have to have, like, it's another one of those cases where you have to have the fanfare and you have to have the orchestral strength to be able to project exactly what we're seeing and like put us in that mindset, right? Like, how epic of a moment is this? Like, how grandiose of a moment is this? And of course he's up to the task. I mean, come on, I've gone over this guy's credits before. Star Trek, Kelvin Timeline, all 3 of those films, phenomenal. Rogue One, the emergency score that he had to put together for that. Like he has such a long list of credits. He's one of the titans of filmmaking, like as far as like composing, like the composition and score is concerned. And how about his magnum opus, The Batman? Right, he's no stranger to any of this stuff. He is, to me, the closest that we have to an heir apparent to John Williams, as far as like top flight movie music composer, is Michael Giacchino. He is absolutely in that realm. He's absolutely part of that. Like like he leads the pack as far as I'm concerned. Like I cannot think of a composer better than him, subjectively speaking, in my regard. Somebody that can match do the themes and create the themes for characters and whatnot, and also give us a vibrant score that supports what we're seeing on screen as well, and really give us the heightened moments of tension, and he can go classic with it, and he can also go atmospheric with it in that regard. He's the best. He's fantastic, and his score for this film is utterly impeccable, as I would expect nothing less from Michael Giacchino. He's the best. As far as I'm concerned right now, the best, the closest that we have to an heir apparent to John Williams, without a doubt. And come on, look at the list of directors he's worked with: Abrams, Brad Bird, Matt Reeves, Pete Docter, Colin Trevorrow, John Watts, Gareth Edwards, Drew Goddard, J.A. Bayona, the Wachowskis, Taika Waititi, and now Matt Shackman. Like, he's all over the place with respect to that. He's composed for several shows, for several movies. He is our best, as far as I'm concerned, right now. Our current, like, modern best. John Williams, the maestro, is still here, but I think he's retired. Didn't he say he retired, like officially from doing stuff, like after, like he's not doing any more Star Wars? We know that, but like Michael Giacchino, like you cannot get better than him as far as film composing is concerned. Like right now, as far as modern composers, he is the best, subjectively speaking, in my opinion, and he absolutely turned in yet another phenomenal piece of work for Fantastic Four First Steps. So my final thoughts for this movie is phenomenal film, absolutely outstanding, definitely high tier MCU as far as the filmmaking is concerned, and definitely, like, what an outstanding July we just had. I didn't see Jurassic World Rebirth, but talking just in terms of comic book movies, right, to have Superman and Fantastic Four First Steps back to back, I mean, that is a fantastic duo. It really is. It's outstanding. We've done well. We have had a great month, us Marvel and DC fans. We really have, as far as both of these films are concerned. And the only thing that keeps me from calling Fantastic Four First Steps the best Marvel film of this year is I really like Thunderbolts. I really, really like Thunderbolts. There's a lot that Thunderbolts does, and I talked about that before, about how I ranked that sixth, right? So that's the number six. That's where, like, that's the sixth movie, if you will, on my MCU rankings that would keep Fantastic Four at, like, no higher than seventh. And I got to figure out where it fits. When No Way Home, Guardians Volume 3, Deadpool and Wolverine, and the first Avengers film, like, where does it sit? Is it better than all four of those? And does it sit at seventh? Is it only better than Guardians, Deadpool, and Wolverine and the Avengers, right? Do I still think No Way Home is better than this? I don't know. This is something that I've got to think about. I will tell you that right now, as I'm thinking about it, I'm leaning towards just putting this seventh and having it right behind Thunderbolts. And if you want to know what my top five are, okay, in this order: Winter Soldier, obviously number one; first Iron Man film, number two; Infinity War, number three; Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, number four; Black Panther, number five. Right, that's where I'm at with respect to these films, and then Thunderbolt 6, of course, and as I said. But Fantastic Four First Steps, definitely no lower than seventh on my MCU rankings list. Probably will be seventh after that second viewing. I'll make that official for sure after I see it. I'll probably post on TikTok with respect to it after I see it a second time. But yeah, it was really good. It was really good, and certainly, I mean, light years ahead of what we've had so far with Fantastic Four films. And I don't hate those movies. I don't, massively dislike those films, but this one is just so much better in terms of the family dynamic, the story itself, the composition, the visuals, and just the music and everything in general. Like, they really did a fantastic job. Pun intended, if you will. I've probably used the word fantastic to describe this movie many times. And then we get to the post-credit scenes, and, to me, the revelation of the mid-credit scene, the idea that, it's 4 years later, Franklin is now older, he's like approaching preschool age, I would say, and Sue leaves the room, turns around, and sees that Doom, Dr. Doom with his mask off, is approaching Franklin is around Franklin, right? Very sinister, and certainly is going to set up what's going on. And this could go a couple different ways. The one thing that I do like about this is I think it pretty much cements for me, and we'll see how this plays out, but it cements for me the idea that how the Fantastic Four get to 616 is not by accident. It is clear to me that they're chasing Doom after he has taken Franklin. He knows what Franklin's capabilities are. He knows what Franklin's powers are. He has him. They're chasing after him. They end up in 616. Whether Doom is meaning to go to 616 or not, don't know. Whether that is just the multiverse that he ends up and they are, maybe he's dimension hopping. Maybe he's hopping multiverses and we see them in 616, pursuant to the Thunderbolts end credit scene, right? Because that's how we know. That's I'm connecting it to that, right? But I just like the idea that they are going to find a way. Reed is going to figure out how to jump multiverses like on his own. And I think they even, like someone mentioned, that they even teased that he knew that like earlier on in the film, right? And that's something else that I got to catch on the second watch is that scene where he talks about that. But yeah, that's the setup for the Fantastic Four returning in Avengers Doomsday. And it's Franklin clearly is going to be a big part of it. Clearly is going to be an integral part of the plot line going forward in that regard. So that's exciting. The animation at the end, I know people, they were, my one buddy Ken, who's a huge Superman fan, he loved the movie, but he said that he didn't really dig that last scene because apparently John Malkovich's cut villain is in that scene, which I didn't catch that. I didn't notice that, but yeah, that's what he and the others are saying, that he's in that scene. So yeah, that last jokey, like a redo of the cartoon scene, it fell flat for a lot of people. I was okay with it. It is what it is. It's an end credit scene, so I'm not making a whole lot out of it, to be honest with you. But then we get to the endless debate. But no, I feel like this is an opportunity to squash debate, because I'll tell you what, in looking at the box office numbers for Fantastic Four, and I can't rely on thenumbers.com because for whatever reason their site's down. Like, they're still posting on Threads, but their site is down. I literally sent them a screenshot. I said, why is your site down? Like, you're still posting numbers, but your site's down. So, and I can't rely, as I've mentioned before, I can't fully rely on Box Office Mojo because they take forever to update their numbers. And these numbers are out. Like, other people are reporting these numbers, and Box Office Mojo still hasn't, like, updated it. They still only have numbers through, like, up through Friday in that regard. We know that Fantastic Four has done better than this. So I have to rely on Gitesh Panda. And what Gitesh Panda is saying, and he's the founder of Box Office Guru. I've been following him for years, and his numbers are pretty spot on as far as his sources and whatnot. He's saying that Fantastic Four opened number one, as we could have expected, 118 million domestic, fourth biggest domestic debut of 2025, right behind Superman's 125 million domestic from 2 weeks ago. Strong reviews and word of mouth, he says, with very front-loaded grosses. $100 million international debut for global box office launch of $218 million. So it does $5 million better than Superman internationally, only $5 million better, and is just behind it in terms of like domestic gross, like $7 million behind domestic gross. And so what that means is that the global gross for the opening weekend is $220 for Superman and $218 for Fantastic Four. Now, why am I bringing up Superman? I'm bringing it up because I want to bring up this post that he had with respect to opening weekend box office. I want to bring up a few things because we can talk box office here responsibly with respect to this. Because our expectation, remember, the argument was that Fantastic Four was going to just completely squash and swallow up Superman at the box office once it released. And no, that's certainly not the case. Like, it had slightly higher Thursday pre-shows. It had a slightly higher Friday. And then a lower Saturday, right? So that's what he means by front-loaded, was that Superman actually did more in its opening Saturday and may do more in its Sunday in that regard as well, as far as projections are concerned. So Superman has a higher opening weekend. There's only a $5 million difference between international box office for both movies. So what I'm getting at here, guys, is, and they also, neither one of them opened very well in China. So what I'm getting at here, guys, is we have a new landscape to talk about here. And the new landscape is no more of this war bullshit. There's no more fighting. There's no more Marvel versus DC in that regard. And I don't give a shit if Marvel outgrosses DC Studios next year, which they surely would. You would think so. With Spider-Man Brand New Day and Avengers Doomsday versus Supergirl and Clayface in that regard. You would think so, but who knows? We'll see how all of those films do in that regard. But what I'm getting at here is that we have a new box office landscape that we need to talk about. First of all, it looks like Fantastic Four and Superman are going to finish around the same numbers. At least they're starting in the same place. Like you've got like Fantastic Four just slightly behind Superman's opening numbers, slightly behind. I mean, it is infinitesimal. Certainly not enough for anybody to pick a fight over at all. And there's no fights that should be picked over. It's that argument has been bullshit in the first place. But the fact of the matter is, this is the landscape that we have for superhero films. And do I think that Fantastic Four is still achieving what a Marvel film needed to achieve in this landscape? Yes, I do. Because when I look at the other opening weekends, right, like if we bring up Brave New World and we bring up Thunderbolts, right, and I'm going to attempt to do that here. I'm going to attempt to type, but of course the internet has got to act slow as shit whenever I want like faster information. That's usually how it works, right? Captain America Brave New World opened at 88.8 million, right? Like that was its opening weekend, right? And so then Thunderbolts, and this is domestically, right? And so then Thunderbolts, if I can learn how to type, why can I not learn how to type? Good grief. Boy, this is annoying. I'm trying to do this in real time, like as I am like recording here. 74.3 million for Thunderbolts domestic opening in that regard, right? So Fantastic Four beats out both of those. There's no question as far as domestic opening at 118 million. But that word of mouth and that A- cinema score, that will tell us that perhaps, even though it was front loaded for that Friday, like we will see how Fantastic Four's legs are. I've seen nothing but positives, right? Obviously, I X out the people that want to try and be tribalistic and say, oh, well, it was clearly this much better than Superman. And, this and that. No, screw all of that. I'm not interested in people telling me how much better Superman necessarily was or how much better Fantastic Four was than Superman. No, and certainly not any of these, Snyder bots and fans that, just all of a sudden want to become, diehard fans of the MCU and stump for Fantastic Four just to spite James Gunn's Superman film. No, those people they can exclusively go straight to hell. Like those are the Lex bots at work in that regard, right? But I bring all this up to say that Fantastic Four clearly a successful opening weekend. And I think that our parameters for successful opening weekends have to reset, guys. They have to reset. Okay, we're done. I mean, I understand what Deadpool and Wolverine made last year. I understand what Spider-Man No Way Home made, post 2020 and in 2021. I get that. But we're at that point now where when it comes to these solo films and they're not like massive nostalgic team-ups, that this is the expectation. This is what we've got to look at with respect to that for these films, right? And maybe it's just the timing of the year, right? Maybe because they both came out in July. I mean, yes, Jurassic World Rebirth, yes, it's done massively much better internationally in that regard, right? And I think even China accepted it. But the interesting thing about that is that it's only going to cross, as of me recording this episode, Jurassic World Rebirth is only going to cross 300 million domestic today, and Superman is already close to that, right? So to me, I feel like we've got to start preparing ourselves for domestic outgrossing international. That is probably going to become less the exception and more of the rule going forward. So don't listen to anybody that tells you this is a weak opening for Fantastic Four. And I don't know if they'll say that or not, because, obviously the goalposts have been moved on Superman, and now they're talking about how, well, it didn't open weekly. It didn't have a weak opening period, but it's weak internationally. Okay, just go ahead and slide that goalpost down. No, Superman is crossing $500 million, is going to move to 600 million. And the expectation now is that Fantastic Four will probably do similar to that. And here's another thing to remember about Fantastic Four is that the second Fantastic Four First Steps gets past $333 million, it then becomes the highest grossing Fantastic Four movie of all time. Do you understand that? Like, that's how low the parameters have been for box office expectations for Fantastic Four. So the second Fantastic Four gets past 333 million, success. Like, as far as like success for the Fantastic Four. And you're not going to question whether or not the MCU is going to continue on its plan, because clearly it's going to. We're getting Brand New Day. We're getting Avengers Doomsday. And Feige has crafted, and he's earned way more, enough goodwill to continue his plan, whatever he's going to do going forward. James Gunn has earned enough goodwill with what he's done at DC Studios just with Superman for David Zaslav to sign off on that going forward, right? So we're in rarefied territory here, where we have Marvel and DC both executing their cinematic shared universes at the same time to success. Fantastic Four First Steps is a success. 118 million domestically, strong opening weekend. 218 million worldwide, globally, also strong opening weekend, right? Same strong opening weekend that Superman had. So don't be surprised if both of these films land around the same number, whatever that number is. Probably both of them are going to be north of 500 million, right? If Superman is north of 500 million after this weekend, then Fantastic Four surely in a couple weeks will be north of 500 million, right? Like, what is Naked Gun going to keep it out? No, I don't think so. I really don't think that's going to be the case in that regard. I feel like the audiences, the support is there. Both of these films are very close in terms of their hell site numbers, with respect to the tomato meter and also the audience the audience reviewing meter, like the popcorn meter. That's what it is. That's right. Yeah, the hell site likes both of these films a great deal. They're both certified fresh, and so and it's deserved, right? Because I mean, that's the message that I want to get out here, guys. With respect to Fantastic Four being as great as it was, as a very good film, at high tier MCU, and it represents a shift in the paradigm where now we get to enjoy both franchises equally. They're on the same playing field in this regard, and we're also talking about unbridled success, like more success. Superman is gonna beat Man of Steel domestically as far as its numbers, and Fantastic Four: First Steps is going to outgross all of the previous Fantastic Four films. It's going to do that. It is going to do that. It is going to happen. We can project that. We most certainly can. We're not looking for massive dropouts or anything like that here, right? It's going to settle around a number that is going to be higher than any previous Fantastic Four film has made, and that is a reason to call for celebration and success and unity. MCU and DCU shaking hands. That's why I bring this up as far as the box office discussion is concerned. Because all these expectations that Fantastic Four was just going to be this massive juggernaut, and also anybody that may have thought that Fantastic Four was going to bomb. No, neither or. Neither one of those is happening. Fantastic Four is succeeding and is going to be successful. And there is no need for this petty, toxic scoreboard mentality bullshit anymore, right? And I am looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to Superman and Fantastic Four finishing around the same number. And that picture that I posted more than a few times where it's Superman giving Reed Richards the fist bump. Yes, that's how it's supposed to be. That's how we're supposed to be, right? I get it. It's business, and they're competing, and one wants to finish ahead of the other monetarily. Yeah, I get that. But in this landscape of superhero movies, we just need to keep the genre itself solvent. And I think it will remain solvent, no doubt about it. But I just like the fact that we got two studios, Marvel Studios and DC Studios, that are both progressing forward and have both had great years. Like I've had a great year this year. I have. With the 4 comic book movies so far that we've had for this season, I have enjoyed all 4 of them. My hierarchy, yes, I would put Superman first, but that's because I'm DC biased. Fantastic Four is only third because of how much I enjoyed Thunderbolts. And we're talking not a whole lot separates those 3 films, right? There's some separation between, First Steps and Captain America Brave New World, because I ranked that 20th in my MCU rankings, right? But we're talking high tier from Marvel that we've gotten from Thunderbolts and from Fantastic Four: First Steps. High tier, right? And certainly, lone tier, if you will, for the DCU, but high tier as far as how people have been responding to it and how they have, really enjoyed Superman. But I've seen people enjoy both Superman and Fantastic Four. I saw a lot of people say that they saw both theaters filled because they went to see both of them, did a double feature on Friday and Saturday. And that's what we want, guys. That's what the ultimate goal here is. That's the mark of true success with respect to these franchises. So yeah, wanted to bring that up. Definitely wanted to talk about that. That's usually something that I reserve for FLITEcast, but I definitely wanted to bring it up here, and talk about it now because we're getting these numbers out for Fantastic Four, and it is a successful opening weekend. The most successful opening weekend for a Marvel film, no doubt about that, without question, right? And just get used to domestic outgrossing the international going forward, because that definitely seems to be the landscape, at least for this year. We'll see if that changes, but right now there's no way that you can consider Fantastic Four: First Steps not a success in its opening weekend. It most certainly is. It will be the most successful Fantastic Four film, to date in history, right? As far as critical acclaim and box office in that regard. So yeah, that is something to hang its hat on, something to hang your hats on if you were a Fantastic Four fan, and looking forward to more of this dynamic in Avengers Doomsday and the rest of the MCU going forward. And that is going to do it for this episode of Flight Review, the final comic book movie review episode of 2025. How about that? But there will still be opportunities for Flight Review episodes for the remainder of this year. Thank you so much for listening to this show. Thank you so much for supporting the Flightcast. If you have thoughts on Fantastic Four First Steps, I know you do. I know many of us, if not all of us, have seen it to this point. And if you want to contribute to the spoiler-filled flight chat discussion that we will have next weekend with respect to this film and certainly Superman and other things as well, you know where to find me on Threads and Instagram at The Flightcast. You can comment on the posting for this episode on the Flightcast YouTube page. I'm on BLUESKY at Flightcast. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page, and of course I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care, stay safe out there, enjoy the films, enjoy the synergy that is a successful Marvel Studios release, along with a successful DC Studios release, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.